What if I told you, the easiest way to attack someone isn't with anger, but with something far more powerful, something they can never defend against: love. There was a time when I believed that to attack someone meant to overpower them, to raise your voice louder than theirs, to prove your point stronger than theirs, to win. I thought victory lived in dominance. I thought strength meant making the other person feel small. But then, life introduced me to someone who changed everything I thought I knew. She didn't fight like others. When I was angry, she didn't match my fire. When I pushed, she didn't push back. Instead, she did something that confused me: she listened. She stayed calm. And somehow, without raising her voice, she made me feel seen. That's when I realized I had been attacking people the wrong way my whole life. You see, the world teaches us that attack means aggression. But the truth is, the most powerful attack is the one no one expects. It's kindness in the face of anger. It's patience when tested. It's love when everything inside you wants to do the opposite. Because when you respond with anger, people build walls. But when you respond with love, those walls start to fall. I remember one night, I was frustrated, overwhelmed, ready to argue. Every word I spoke was sharp. Every sentence was meant to win. But she just looked at me, not with fear, not with anger, but with understanding. And in that moment, I lost. Not the argument, but the fight inside me. That's the thing about love: it doesn't attack to destroy. It attacks to transform. Imagine this: instead of trying to defeat someone, you try to understand them. Instead of proving them wrong, you make them feel heard. Instead of reacting, you choose to respond. That's when something magical happens. The person you thought was your opponent becomes human again. Because deep down, no one is really your enemy. People are just carrying their own battles, their own fears, their own pain. And when you attack them with love, you're not breaking them, you're reaching them. Winning an argument might give you a moment of satisfaction. But winning someone's heart, that changes everything. It takes courage to stay calm when you're provoked. It takes strength to be kind when it's easier to be harsh. It takes power to love when your ego demands revenge. But that is the real victory. Because in the end, the strongest person in the room isn't the one who shouts the loudest, it's the one who can turn anger into peace, distance into connection, and conflict into understanding. So if you ever want to attack someone, don't do it with hate. Don't do it with words that wound. Attack them with love so genuine, so unexpected, that they don't know how to defend against it. And that's when you truly win. The first thing we need to understand is how deeply we have misunderstood the idea of attack when it comes to human emotions. From a very young age, we are taught, directly or indirectly, that attacking someone means overpowering them, raising our voice, proving them wrong, or showing dominance. It becomes associated with control, with ego, with the need to win at any cost. In relationships, this misunderstanding quietly grows stronger, shaping the way we respond when we feel hurt, ignored, or misunderstood. In a love story, this confusion becomes even more visible. Two people who care about each other suddenly turn into opponents, not because they want to hurt each other, but because they don't know any other way to express what they feel inside. When emotions rise, words become sharper, tones become colder, and what started as a simple misunderstanding turns into a battle of who is right and who is wrong. In those moments, attack becomes a reaction, not a choice. It becomes an emotional reflex driven by fear, insecurity, or the need to protect oneself. But the truth is, most emotional attacks are not really about the other person. They are about what is happening inside us. When someone feels unheard, they attack louder. When someone feels unappreciated, they attack through criticism. When someone feels insecure, they attack by trying to control the situation. It is rarely about hatred, it is often about pain that doesn't know how to speak gently. In a love story, this misunderstanding creates distance between two hearts that once felt close. Instead of sharing feelings, partners start defending themselves. Instead of listening, they prepare their next response. The connection weakens not because love disappears, but because the way of expressing it becomes distorted. The word attack starts replacing the language of care, and slowly, both people forget that they are on the same side. What makes this even more complex is that emotional attacks often feel justified in the moment. When you are hurt, it feels natural to respond with equal intensity. When you feel wronged, it feels right to push back harder. But beneath all of this is a simple truth that often goes unnoticed, that attacking someone emotionally rarely solves the problem, it only shifts the focus from understanding to defending, from connection to conflict. The most unexpected force in any emotional battle is love, because it moves in a direction no one prepares for. When people think of conflict, they expect resistance, arguments, raised voices, or silence filled with tension. They expect a reaction that mirrors their own intensity. But love does something entirely different. It interrupts that pattern in a way that feels almost disarming, almost confusing, because it refuses to follow the rules of conflict. In a love story, this becomes a quiet turning point. Imagine a moment where one person is ready to argue, carrying frustration, ready to defend every feeling, every word. The air is heavy, the silence sharp, and everything points toward a clash. But instead of responding with the same energy, the other person chooses softness. They listen without interrupting. They respond without blame. They hold their emotions steady instead of letting them explode. That choice changes the entire atmosphere, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that slowly dissolves the tension. Love, in this sense, becomes powerful not because it dominates, but because it absorbs. It takes in anger without immediately reflecting it back. It creates space where emotions can settle instead of escalate. And in doing so, it removes the very foundation that conflict stands on. When there is no equal force pushing back, the intensity of the moment begins to lose its grip. The person who came prepared for a fight suddenly finds themselves facing calm instead of resistance, and that calm becomes difficult to fight against. This is what makes love such an unexpected force. It doesn't try to win in the traditional sense. It doesn't aim to prove superiority or claim victory. Instead, it shifts the focus from winning to understanding, from reacting to connecting. In relationships, this shift is often the difference between growing closer or drifting apart. When love replaces the instinct to attack, it allows both people to feel safe enough to lower their defenses. There is also a quiet strength in choosing love in these moments. It requires control over one's own emotions, the ability to pause instead of react, the courage to remain open when it feels easier to close off. It is not passive, and it is not weak. It is a deliberate choice to protect the connection rather than the ego, to value the relationship more than the momentary satisfaction of being right. Conflict in relationships often begins in the smallest space between two people, not because they are enemies, but because they stop seeing each other clearly in that moment. Turning conflict into connection is not about avoiding disagreements, but about changing the way those disagreements are handled when emotions are high and understanding is low. In a love story, this transformation begins when both individuals realize that they are not standing on opposite sides of a battlefield, but rather sitting in the same emotional journey with different perspectives. There are moments in love when words become sharp without intention, when silence feels heavier than explanation, and when misunderstanding grows faster than truth. In such moments, conflict feels natural, almost automatic. But connection begins when one person chooses to pause instead of escalate, to listen instead of defend, to understand instead of assume. That single shift does not erase the problem, but it changes the direction of the interaction. In a love story, turning conflict into connection often starts with emotional awareness. It is the ability to recognize that what is being said in anger is not always the full truth, and what is being heard in pain is often filtered through fear. When one person speaks from frustration, and the other responds with curiosity instead of reaction, something subtle begins to change. The energy of the conversation softens, and space opens for honesty rather than defense. Connection grows when both individuals begin to prioritize the relationship over the argument. Instead of focusing on who is right, they begin to focus on what is real beneath the conflict. Sometimes it is insecurity, sometimes it is unmet expectations, sometimes it is unspoken emotions that were never addressed earlier. When these deeper layers are acknowledged, the conflict stops being a battle and starts becoming a bridge. In love, even silence can become a tool for connection if it is used with understanding rather than distance. A pause in an argument can either build walls or create reflection. When used wisely, it allows emotions to settle enough for clarity to return. And once clarity returns, conversation shifts from accusation to expression, from blame to sharing. Over time, couples who learn to transform conflict into connection begin to see arguments differently. They no longer view them as threats to the relationship, but as moments that reveal what needs attention. Instead of breaking apart under pressure, they use pressure as a way to understand each other more deeply, creating a bond that becomes stronger through emotional honesty rather than emotional avoidance. Winning hearts instead of arguments begins with a complete shift in what we consider victory in human connection. In most situations, especially within relationships, people are trained to believe that winning means proving a point, correcting the other person, or standing on the side of being right. But in a love story, this idea slowly loses its meaning when emotional consequences begin to matter more than verbal victories. There are moments when two people care deeply for each other, yet find themselves standing in disagreement. In those moments, the instinct is often to defend, to explain, to counter every word with another stronger word. The conversation becomes a silent competition where both sides are trying to be understood first, instead of trying to understand. But when the focus shifts from arguments to hearts, something entirely different begins to unfold. Winning a heart is not about overpowering someone's opinion. It is about making them feel safe enough to express it without fear of judgment. It is about creating an emotional environment where the other person does not feel like they are being defeated, but rather being heard. In love, this becomes more important than any logical conclusion, because emotional safety often matters more than being correct. In a love story, there are moments when silence does more damage than words, and there are moments when gentle words heal more than long explanations. When someone chooses to respond with patience instead of urgency, or with understanding instead of correction, they are no longer trying to win the argument. They are trying to win something deeper: the trust, the comfort, and the emotional openness of the person in front of them. Winning hearts also means accepting imperfection in communication. It means realizing that not every disagreement needs to end with agreement, but every disagreement should end with respect. When respect becomes the foundation, arguments lose their destructive power. Instead of pushing people away, conversations begin to bring them closer, even if opinions remain different. There is a quiet strength in choosing connection over correctness. It requires letting go of ego-driven satisfaction and replacing it with emotional awareness. It means understanding that the goal is not to defeat the person you love, but to ensure they still feel loved even in moments of disagreement. Over time, this approach changes the entire dynamic of a relationship, where conversations stop feeling like battles and start feeling like shared understanding, where emotional closeness becomes more valuable than verbal victory. There is a kind of strength that does not announce itself loudly, does not demand attention, and does not rely on proving anything to the world. It is the quiet strength of emotional courage, the ability to remain steady when everything inside you is pushing you toward reaction, ego, or defense. In a love story, this strength becomes the foundation of everything meaningful, because relationships are not tested in moments of ease, but in moments of emotional pressure. When emotions rise between two people, the easiest path is often to react. To respond immediately, to defend oneself, to match intensity with intensity. But emotional courage is found in the space between feeling and reaction. It is in that small, almost invisible pause where a person chooses not to escalate what is already fragile. Instead of feeding the conflict, they hold it with awareness, even when it feels uncomfortable to do so. In a love story, this quiet strength appears when one person chooses understanding over ego. When words become sharp, instead of sharpening them further, they soften their response. When misunderstandings begin to grow, instead of feeding them with assumptions, they ask for clarity. This is not weakness, it is a deeper form of control over the emotional self rather than control over the other person. Emotional courage also means being vulnerable without fear. It is the ability to express feelings honestly without turning them into weapons. Many people hide their true emotions behind anger because anger feels safer than vulnerability. But in love, real connection is built when someone has the courage to say what they truly feel, even if it makes them open, even if it makes them exposed. There are moments in relationships where silence feels easier than explanation, where walking away feels easier than staying present. But emotional courage chooses presence. It chooses to stay in the discomfort long enough to understand what is really happening beneath the surface of the conflict. It does not rush to escape emotional difficulty, instead, it learns from it. Over time, this quiet strength becomes the reason relationships survive misunderstandings that would otherwise break them. It allows love to grow in spaces where pride would normally take over. It creates an environment where both people feel safe enough to be imperfect, to be human, and to be honest without fear of emotional punishment. This strength does not need recognition, because its impact is already visible in the calm it creates, in the trust it builds, and in the way it slowly transforms emotional chaos into understanding without forcing it, without demanding it, and without trying to control the outcome of every moment.